What drives a man to endure the unendurable for Liam O'Connell, a human living on the fringes of a world that wasn't his? The answer was in the eyes of a girl the world had condemned. He was nothing to them, a fragile, packless mortal. She was their sister, a pariah cursed with a power they couldn't control. When their ancient brutal law demanded a price be paid in blood, Liam did the unthinkable. He stepped forward to take her punishment, 10 lashes of a silver-laced whip, a certain death for any human. But no one, least of all him, could have predicted what would happen the next day, when her brothers, the very wolves who ordered his torment, fell to their knees and bowed. This is the story of how one man's sacrifice shattered 1,000 years of tradition and forged a legend. The town of Blackwood Creek was a secret whispered on the edge of the sprawling Silverwood National Forest. To the tourists who stopped for gas or a slice of pie at Donna's Diner, it was a quaint, sleepy hollow. To those who lived there, it was the heart of a territory ruled by a power far older than the state of Oregon itself. It was a werewolf town. And Liam O'Connell, a doctoral candidate in folklore and anthropology, was the town's only full-time human resident who knew the truth. He hadn't come seeking monsters. He'd come seeking the source of a unique cluster of local legends, stories of guardian spirits and moon-touched families that were unusually consistent for oral traditions. It took him 6 months of patient observation, of poring over town archives in the dusty library basement and nursing lukewarm beers at the Gilded Antler to realize the legends weren't history. They were camouflage. The Vance family was the undisputed center of this hidden world. They were the alphas of the Blackwood Pack. The 3 brothers were practically royalty. Cale Vance, the current alpha, was a formidable presence. He moved with the coiled intensity of a predator, his dark eyes missing nothing. He had an aura of authority so potent it felt like a physical weight. Ronan, the second brother, was the pack's beta and strategist, leaner, quieter, with a chillingly analytical gaze that seemed to dissect everyone it fell upon. The youngest was Finn, the pack's enforcer, built like a lumberjack with a deceptively easygoing smile that never quite reached his watchful eyes. They tolerated Liam. His academic pursuit was a convenient cover, and he was meticulously respectful of their boundaries. He was the harmless human scholar, a curiosity. But their tolerance was a thin, brittle thing. He saw the truth in the flick of their eyes when he stayed out past dusk, the subtle way the townsfolk would herd him towards the light, with friendly but firm suggestions. He was an outsider, a sheep living in a den of wolves. And then there was Elara. Elara Vance was the brother's younger sister, and she was the town's deepest, most painful secret. She was an enigma wrapped in sorrow. Liam first saw her not in the town, but on its periphery, a fleeting figure moving through the dense woods like a ghost. She had the same dark, striking hair as her brothers, but where they burned with power and confidence, she seemed to flicker as if constantly on the verge of being extinguished. The pack ostracized her. They didn't speak her name, and when she occasionally slipped into the general store for supplies, a hush would fall. People would turn away, not with malice, but with a deep, superstitious fear. Her own brothers, who ruled the town with an iron fist, treated her with a mixture of pained duty and severe distance. They ensured she had a small, isolated cabin at the edge of their territory, but they never visited, never spoke to her in public. She was a pariah, an exile in her own home. Liam, driven by the same curiosity that brought him to Blackwood Creek, was fascinated. He began to subtly track her appearances, noting the patterns. She only came to town during the day, always cloaked in a heavy shawl, even in the mild autumn. She never made eye contact. He started leaving books on a stump near a trail he knew she used collections of poetry novels of far-off places. For weeks, they would vanish, with no acknowledgement. One rainy afternoon, he found her huddled under the awning of the closed-down blacksmith shop, clutching a worn copy of Yeats he'd left out. She was trembling, her eyes wide, with a terror that seemed to come from within. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft. She flinched, her head snapping up. Her eyes were a startling shade of violet, flecked with silver. They were the most beautiful and haunted eyes he had ever seen. "You shouldn't talk to me," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Why not? It's dangerous. For you." A tremor ran through her, so violent he saw her teeth chatter. "Things happen around me." Before he could respond, a low growl echoed from the end of the street. Ronan Vance stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't shout, he didn't run. He just looked at Liam, a look that promised violence, and then shifted his gaze to his sister. "Ilara." "Go home," he commanded. His voice was flat, devoid of warmth. Ilara shrank back, clutching the book to her chest. With a final panicked glance at Liam, she turned and fled, disappearing into the misty rain like a phantom. Ronan strode forward, stopping a foot from Liam. The sheer physical intimidation was overwhelming. "She is not your concern, human," Ronan said, his voice a low snarl. "Her problems are pack business. You are a guest here. A guest who has overstayed his welcome if you continue to pry into matters that are beyond you." "She looked like she was in trouble," Liam said, holding his ground despite the primal fear screaming at him to run. A flicker of something. Was it pain crossed Ronan's face before it was replaced by stone? "You have no idea what trouble is. Forget you ever saw her. Forget she exists. It will be better for everyone. Especially you." He turned and walked away, leaving Liam standing in the rain, his heart pounding, not just from fear, but from a sudden fierce and utterly illogical sense of protectiveness for the girl with violet eyes. He didn't know what curse she carried, but he knew with bone-deep certainty that she wasn't a monster. And in a town full of them, she was the one they were all afraid of. Ronan's warning was an explicit threat, one Liam knew he should heed. The Vances were not men you crossed, but the image of Ilara's terrified face was burned into his mind. Forgetting her wasn't an option. His academic curiosity had morphed into something deeply personal. He began to dig, but not into the Vance family directly. He revisited his research, looking for anomalies for myths that didn't quite fit the standard werewolf lore. He found it in a tattered handwritten journal from a former town doctor, a man named Alistair Finch, dated over a century ago. Finch wrote of a rare bloodline, a genetic quirk that appeared once every few generations. He called it Luna Inordinata, the unruly moon. According to Finch's terrified scribblings, those born with it were not just werewolves. They were conduits for the raw, chaotic energy of the moon itself. They didn't just shift form. They could warp reality in small, unpredictable ways. They could cause sudden frosts in summer, make animals behave erratically, and induce powerful, often terrifying visions in those around them. They were seers empaths, and elemental chaos rolled into one. The journal described them as both a blessing and a curse, a potential source of immense power, but one that was nearly impossible to control. Most, Finch wrote, were driven mad by the power eventually consuming themselves and lashing out at their own packs. Pack law, he noted grimly, was often swift and brutal in its solution. Ilara. This had to be her curse. It explained the fear, the isolation. The pack wasn't just shunning her. They were quarantining a force of nature they couldn't comprehend. Driven by this new understanding, Liam risked seeking her out again. He found her a week later, not in town, but deep in the forest, sitting by a rushing creek, her knees drawn to her chest. She had a halo of nervous energy around her, as if the very air was vibrating. He didn't approach directly. He sat on a rock 50 feet away and just waited. It took nearly an hour before she acknowledged him. "You're still here," she said, without looking at him. "My brothers could kill you for this." "They could," he agreed calmly. "But they haven't yet." She finally turned her head. Her violet eyes studied him, searching for something. Why are you risking it? I read about something called Luna Inordinata," he said softly. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. She scrambled to her feet, a wave of unseen force blasting outwards from her. The leaves on the trees around them rustled wildly, and a chill wind whipped through the clearing, though the rest of the forest was still. "Stay away from me," she cried, her voice cracking with panic. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know you're not a monster." Liam said, his voice steady, despite the unnerving display of power. "I know you're scared. Your pack treats you like a disease. But a gift you can't control isn't a curse, Elara. It's just a challenge." Tears streamed down her face. "A challenge. Last week I had a nightmare, and every mirror in my cabin shattered. When Finn tried to bring me supplies 2 months ago, he got too close, and he was struck blind for an hour, seeing visions of a forest fire. They're not just scared of me, Liam. They're scared for me. And for themselves. They're right to be." This was the opening he needed. Over the next few weeks, they established a fragile routine of secret meetings. Liam, with his scholar's mind, approached her power not with fear, but with methodology. He brought her journals to document her feelings and the corresponding environmental effects. He taught her grounding techniques he'd read about in esoteric texts, focusing on sensory details, breathing exercises, reciting poetry. It was a fumbling, imperfect process, but for the first time in Elara's life, someone was trying to help her understand her power, not just suppress it. Slowly she began to change. The haunted look in her eyes lessened, replaced by sparks of curiosity, and even on occasion, a shy smile. She told him of her lonely childhood, of the day her powers first manifested during a pack ceremony, causing the ceremonial bonfire to erupt in a pillar of purple flame. She spoke of her brother's fear, their clumsy attempts to help, that only made things worse, and their eventual heartbreaking decision to isolate her for the good of the pack. "Kyle, he used to read to me every night," she said wistfully one evening as they sat watching the sunset from a high ridge. "After my powers came, he started seeing things when he was near me, visions of the pack being destroyed. He thinks I'm an omen, that I'll be the end of them all. His duty as alpha forced him to choose the pack over his sister." Liam's heart ached for her. He found himself falling for this girl who carried a universe of chaos inside her. His feelings were reckless, insane, and utterly undeniable. He was a human in love with a magical time bomb, and her brothers were the ones with their fingers on the trigger. Their secret, however, was not as well kept as they thought. The forest had eyes and ears. Ronan, the ever-watchful beta, had grown more suspicious of the human scholar's frequent hikes. He assigned a young wolf, barely more than a pup, to trail Liam. One afternoon, as Liam and Elara were laughing softly over a passage in a book, a twig snapped nearby. Elara's good mood vanished, replaced by a surge of panicked energy. The air grew cold. "Someone's here," she gasped. Before Liam could react, a figure stumbled out of the bushes, a young pack member named Silas. His eyes were wide and blank, unfocused. He began to scream, clawing at his own face. "Fire! The trees are burning! The Alpha is dead! It's all gone!" he shrieked, lost in a terrifying vision. Elara cried out, a wave of guilt and horror washing over her. No, I didn't mean to. Her loss of control amplified the effect. Silas collapsed, convulsing on the forest floor, and from the trees, 2 massive wolves emerged, their fur bristling. They shifted mid-stride, resolving into the furious forms of Cale and Ronan Vance. Cale rushed to the fallen boy's side, while Ronan's gaze locked onto Liam, filled with a murderous rage that promised a world of pain. I warned you, human Ronan snarled, his voice a low growl that was more wolf than man. I told you to stay away. Kyle looked up from the twitching form of Silas, his face pale. His eyes, however, were not on Liam. They were fixed on his sister, and in them was a look of utter despair and cold, resolute judgment. The fragile peace was shattered. The scholar had been caught tampering with the pack's most volatile secret, and the consequences were about to be dire. The pack's justice was as swift and unforgiving as a winter storm. Kyle and Ronan dragged Liam and Elara back to the main pack compound, a collection of large rustic timber houses surrounding a central, hard-packed earthen clearing. It was the heart of their territory, and tonight it would serve as a courtroom. Silas was carried to the pack healer, his screams having subsided into incoherent muttering. Word spread like wildfire. Pack members emerged from their homes, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, and morbid curiosity. They formed a silent, menacing circle around the clearing, their eyes glowing faintly in the deepening twilight. Kyle stood in the center of the circle, his authority radiating like heat. He was no longer a brother. He was the Alpha, the law incarnate. Ronan and Finn stood at his sides, their expressions grim and unyielding. Elara Vance Kyle's voice boomed sharp and formal, cutting through the tense silence. You have, through your uncontrolled affliction, harmed a member of this pack. Silas is lost in a waking nightmare, one from which our healer cannot wake him. This is not the first time your instability has brought danger to us. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled pack. For years we have tolerated this danger. We have sheltered you, isolated you, and prayed to the moon that this curse would fade. Instead, it has festered, and now you have brought this human. He gestured to Liam with contempt into our sacred spaces, further endangering us all with his ignorance. Elara trembled, but she stood tall. The time she had spent with Liam had given her a sliver of strength she hadn't possessed before. It was an accident, Kyle. You know I cannot control it. And Liam, he was only trying to help me. Help you, Ronan scoffed, stepping forward. He's a human academic, a parasite studying us like insects. He encouraged you to play with a power that can shatter minds. His help has resulted in the injury of one of our own. The crowd murmured in agreement, their hostility a palpable force. Liam stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Elara. She's not a weapon, and she's not a curse. She's your sister. She's scared, and instead of helping her, you locked her away and treated her like a monster. A furious growl ripped from Finn's throat. You know nothing of our ways, human. We did what we had to do to protect the pack. Your pack is a family. Liam shot back, his voice ringing with a conviction he didn't know he had. And you abandoned one of your own. Cale held up a hand, silencing the brewing chaos. His face was a mask of cold, hard duty. The weight of his alpha responsibility was crushing any fraternal feeling he might have had. His ignorance is irrelevant, Kyle declared. The fact remains the danger has escalated. The law is clear. When a pack member becomes an uncontrollable and consistent threat to the safety of the whole, they must be cast out. He looked at Elara, and for a fleeting moment, Liam saw a flash of profound agony in his eyes. The sentence is exile. You will be stripped of the Vance name and driven from this territory by sunrise. You will survive in the human world or with the rogues or not at all. It is no longer our concern." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Exile was a death sentence. A lone wolf, especially one as unstable as Elara, would be torn apart by feral rogues, or hunted by those who knew of the supernatural. Elara's face went white with terror. She looked at her brothers, her family, who were now her judges and executioners. There was no mercy in their faces, only the grim finality of the law. Liam's mind raced. He thought of all the ancient texts he'd read, the obscure pack laws and forgotten traditions he had memorized out of academic interest. He had dismissed many as barbaric relics of a bygone era. But now, one obscure, desperate-sounding law clawed its way to the front of his mind. A footnote in an old Alpha's journal. It was insane. It was suicide. But it was the only thing he had left. "Wait," Liam's voice cut through the air. Kale turned his cold gaze on him. "You have no voice here, human. Be grateful we do not strip the flesh from your bones for your meddling." "I invoke the plea of the unbound," Liam said, his voice shaking but clear. A stunned, disbelieving silence fell over the entire clearing. Even Kyle's composure cracked, his eyes widening in shock. The plea of the unbound was a ghost, a myth. It was a clause so ancient and so brutal that no one had used it in half a millennium. It stated that a non-pack member, an unbound soul, could stand for a condemned pack member and take their punishment upon themselves. If they survived, the condemned's debt was considered paid, but the punishment was always calibrated for a werewolf's resilience. For a human, it was certain death. "You don't know what you're saying," Ronan snarled, taking a threatening step forward. "I know exactly what I'm saying," Liam insisted, his eyes locked on Kale. "The law says the Alpha must set a punishment of blood or pain to cleanse the transgression. I will take Elara's place. I will take her punishment. Whatever you decide." Kyle stared at him, his mind clearly reeling. To deny the plea would be to deny the ancient laws upon which his authority was built. To accept it would be to publicly execute a human who, for all his meddling, was still technically a guest under his protection. Elara grabbed Liam's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "No, Liam, no, you can't. It will kill you," she pleaded, her voice thick with panic. Liam looked at her, his expression soft but resolute. "You gave me a reason to be here beyond just books and theories," he whispered. "Let me do this." Kyle's face hardened, the conflict within him, resolving into the cold steel of the Alpha. If the human was foolish enough to force his hand and call upon the old ways, then the old ways would be answered. It was a matter of honor, of law. So be it. Kale's voice was like stone grinding on stone. The transgression was a wound to the pack's spirit and mind. The price then will be one of the flesh. The law of retribution demands 10 lashes with the silver-laced whip. A wave of shock and horror passed through the pack. Even the most hardened among them flinched. The silver-laced whip was used to punish werewolves who challenged the Alpha. The silver burned their skin, preventing their healing abilities from kicking in immediately. It was agony for a wolf. For a human, each lash would be a flaying, a deep, searing wound that would lead to shock blood loss and a slow, excruciating death. Brother No Fin protested, his face pale. "He's a human. He won't survive the first." He invoked the law. Kale roared his authority, quashing all dissent. "The law will be satisfied. Bring the post, bring the whip." They were going to do it. They were actually going to kill him. Liam looked at Elara's horrified face, the tears streaming down her cheeks, and felt a strange calm settle over him. He had made his choice. For her, he would face the fire. The punishment post stood in the center of the clearing, like a grim monolith, its wood darkened by age and stained by the memories of past judgments. It was thick, solid oak, scarred with claw marks and gouges. Two of the pack's larger enforcers seized Liam their grips like iron vices. He didn't struggle. His mind was a strange cocktail of terror and resolve. He was marched towards the post, the eyes of the entire pack burning into him. Elara screamed, fighting against Finn, who held her back. "Kyle, please don't do this. I'll accept the exile. Just let him go." Kyle's face was unreadable, carved from granite. "The plea has been made. The law cannot be unwritten." He turned to Liam. "You have one last chance to recant, human. No one will call you a coward." Liam looked past the Alpha, his gaze finding Elara's. In her violet eyes, he saw a storm of despair, and beneath it, a flicker of something he hadn't seen before, directed at him a desperate, powerful love. That was all the answer he needed. No, Liam said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I will not recant." With grim efficiency, the enforcers stripped his shirt from him, exposing his back to the cold night air. The murmuring of the crowd died down, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. They tied his wrists to the iron rings, bolted to the post, pulling his arms taut above his head. He was stretched out, vulnerable. The rough bark of the post dug into his chest. Ronan emerged from the Alpha's lodge. In his hand, he held a long, thick leather whip, braided with strands of gleaming silver that caught the moonlight like captured stars. The whip was a thing of cruel beauty, a tool of absolute authority. Kyle took the whip from his brother. As the Alpha, it was his right, and his duty to administer the punishment himself. He tested the weight of it in his hand, the leather creaking ominously. He stood behind Liam. Liam could feel the heat radiating from the Alpha's body, could hear the soft whisper of his breath. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself. The first lash, Kyle announced his voice, devoid of emotion, for endangering the pack. The air whistled. Then came a sound like a lightning strike, a sickening crack that echoed across the clearing. An explosion of pure, unadulterated agony erupted on Liam's back. It was not a cut, it was a fire. The silver felt like molten lava being poured directly into his flesh. A scream was torn from his throat, raw and animalistic. His vision went white, then black, then burst into a galaxy of pain-induced stars. He could hear Elara's answering scream, a sound of pure anguish. The second lash, Kale's voice was relentless for trespassing on sacred matters. The whip fell again. This time, Liam was ready for it, but the preparation did nothing. The pain was so absolute, so overwhelming, that it seemed to have a life of its own. It seared a new line of fire across his back, crossing the first. He felt his skin split, felt the hot rush of blood. He bit his lip hard enough to taste copper, trying to stifle his cries. The third, for arrogance, crack. Liam's body convulsed. His head slumped forward, sweat and tears plastering his hair to his face. He focused on the only thing he could, Elara's face in his mind. Her violet eyes, her shy smile. The fourth, for hubris, crack. His knees buckled, his entire weight now hanging from his wrists. A low groan escaped him. He could feel the blood running down his back, hot and sticky against the cold night air. The pack was silent, watching. Some looked on with grim satisfaction, others with a dawning horror at what they were witnessing. A human, a fragile mortal man, was enduring a punishment that had broken werewolves. The fifth for disrupting the pack order. Crack! A black wave threatened to pull him under. He was losing consciousness. No, he thought. I have to see it through, all 10. He fought to stay present, to feel every searing moment. This was his payment for her life. It had to be paid in full. By the 6th lash, his back was a mangled ruin. The 7th stole his breath entirely. With the 8th, his body went into shock, trembling uncontrollably. He was no longer making sounds, just ragged, desperate gasps for air. Finn couldn't watch anymore. He turned away, his face ashen. Even Ronan's stony expression showed a flicker of something disbelief, perhaps even a sliver of respect. This human refused to break. Kyle's arm had to be aching. His breathing was heavy. Each lash was a blow against his own conscience, but the law was absolute. He raised the whip again. The 9th for witchcraft, he grunted, though the accusation sounded hollow now even to his own ears. The word was wrong. What the human was displaying wasn't arrogance or meddling. It was something else entirely. Something purer. Sacrifice. The 9th blow landed. Liam's world dissolved into a featureless grey fog of agony. He was detached, floating. He could hear a distant keening wail. It was Ilara. He clung to that sound. It was his anchor in the storm. One more. Just one more. Kyle stood over the bloody broken form of the human. He had expected him to pass out after the 2nd lash, to be dead by the 5th. Yet he was still conscious, still hanging there. This frail mortal was showing more strength than many of his own pack. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The 10th lash, Kyle's voice was strained, almost a whisper. For the crime of Ilara Vance is paid. The final lash was almost anticlimactic. Liam's body barely even registered it. There was no more flesh to tear, only a canvas of raw muscle and exposed bone. When the searing pain came, it was just another drop in an ocean of torment. His head fell forward, his body hanging limp and motionless. "It is done," Kyle announced, letting the blood-soaked whip fall from his hand. He looked at his work, at the human he had just effectively executed, and felt not the satisfaction of justice, but a cold, hollow sickness in the pit of his stomach. Finn rushed forward and cut Liam's bonds. Liam's body crumpled to the ground in a heap, falling onto the hard-packed earth with a sickening thud. He was unconscious, barely breathing. Ilara finally broke free. She ran to him, falling to her knees in the dirt and blood beside him. "Liam," she sobbed, her hands hovering over his mutilated back, afraid to touch him. "Liam, wake up. Please!" The pack healer, an old woman named Morwen, pushed her way through the crowd. She knelt, her ancient fingers gently probing for a pulse. She looked up at Kyle, her face grim. "He's alive," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "But barely. His heart is a flicker. I have never seen anything like this. No human should have been able to withstand that." As Ilara wept over Liam's broken body, something strange began to happen. A faint, silvery light started to glow from the center of her chest. It pulsed in time with Liam's fading heartbeat. The light grew brighter, and a tendril of it flowed from her down her arm and into Liam, where her hand rested on his shoulder. And on the back of her hand, a new mark began to form, glowing with ethereal light, a swirling pattern of a crescent moon, shielded by a steadfast, unadorned spear. The pack stared in stunned, superstitious awe. They had no idea what it meant, but they knew they had just witnessed something far more significant than a mere punishment. The ancient law had been fulfilled, but in doing so, it had awakened something far, far older. Liam drifted in a sea of pain. It was a place without thought or time, only the dull, throbbing echo of the agony he had endured. He was vaguely aware of gentle hands, the smell of antiseptic herbs, and a soft humming sound that seemed to soothe the edges of his suffering. When he finally surfaced, it was to the dim light of a room he didn't recognize. He was lying on his stomach on a soft bed. A cool, pleasant, tingling sensation covered his back, a stark contrast to the fire he remembered. He tried to move, but a gentle hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Easy." A soft voice whispered. It was Ilara. He turned his head slowly. She was sitting on a stool beside the bed, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but filled with a light he'd never seen before. She looked hopeful. "Ilara," his voice was a dry crackle. "What happened, am I?" "You're alive," she said, a tear of relief tracing a path down her cheek. "You're in the healer's lodge," Morwen said. She said, "You're a miracle." He tried to push himself up a jolt of pain, reminding him of his folly. "My back?" "It's healing," Ilara said, her voice filled with wonder. "Impossibly fast." Morwen applied a salve of silvermoss and wolfsbane, but that should only numb the pain for a werewolf. "On you. It's closing the wounds." She doesn't understand it. Ilara held up her right hand. On the back of it, the intricate, glowing mark of a moon and spear was now a permanent silver-colored tattoo. "This appeared when I touched you." Liam stared at the mark, his scholar's mind clicking into gear despite the haze of pain. A unique, magical sigil appearing after a blood sacrifice, made in the name of another. It was a classic trope of the oldest myths. "And you?" he asked, his voice gaining a little strength. "What happened after I passed out, Kale?" He declared the debt paid. "The exile is revoked." She looked down at her hand again. "But everything has changed. No one knows what this mark means. They're afraid." Kyle has had Morwen and the pack elders locked in the library since last night, searching the old texts. As if on cue, the door to the lodge creaked open. Morwen, the ancient healer, entered. Her face, usually a mask of calm wisdom, was alight with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "The Alpha requires your presence," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Both of you." They found it. With Morwen and Ilara's help, Liam was able to get to his feet. A thick, poultice-covered bandage was wrapped around his torso. He was weak, and every movement sent a sharp protest through his muscles, but the all-consuming agony was gone. It was, as Ilara had said, impossible. They walked slowly across the compound towards the Alpha's lodge, which also housed the pack's library of ancient lore. The pack members they passed stopped and stared. Their expressions were no longer hostile or pitying. They were filled with a profound, fearful reverence. They parted for the trio as if Liam were a king. He wasn't just the human who had survived the whip. He was something more now, something they didn't understand. Inside the library, the air was thick with the smell of old parchment and dust. Kyle, Ronan, and Finn stood around a massive oak table, upon which a huge leather-bound book with a crumbling spine was laid open. Its pages were covered in a faded archaic script. Kyle looked up as they entered. The arrogance and cold fury were gone from his face, replaced by a deep, unsettling uncertainty. He looked at Liam, truly looked at him for the first time. "O'Connell," he said, his voice strained. "We owe you an explanation, and perhaps an apology." Ronan, the ever-skeptical strategist, simply stared at Liam with wide, disbelieving eyes. Finn shifted his weight, looking ashamed. Morwen pointed a gnarled finger at the open page. "It's here. A text so old, we thought it was just a legend. A prophecy from the time of the first Alphas." Liam leaned over the table, his eyes scanning the ancient text. Ilara read over his shoulder, her breath catching in her throat. The prophecy spoke of the Luna Inordinata bloodline, calling it not a curse, but a moon gift, a sacred connection to the wild magic of the world. It foretold that the gift would grow wild and dangerous if not anchored. It spoke of a time when the pack would forget the old ways and fear the gift, bringing one of their own to the brink of destruction. And then came the final passage, the one that made Liam's blood run cold. When the pack's fear threatens to extinguish the moon gift, a soul unbound by blood or bite shall stand in defiance. He will offer his flesh to the law and his blood to the earth in the name of the cursed moon. Through his sacrifice, the ancient pact shall be reawakened. The Protector's mark shall burn upon them, both binding his soul to hers, his endurance to her power. He shall become her anchor in the storm of creation, the spear that guards the moon. Human in form, but guardian in spirit. He will be the pack's salvation, for his heart will temper the power that their fangs could not. A soul unbound, a human, Ronan murmured, finally finding his voice. It's you? Kyle looked from the book to Liam, then to his sister. He saw the silvery mark on Elara's hand, and though he couldn't see it, he knew a corresponding mark must now exist on Liam. The lashes? Kyle said, his voice thick with dawning comprehension. They weren't just a punishment. They were a blood ritual. Your sacrifice, your willingness to die for her, fulfilled the conditions of the prophecy. It forged a bond between you, a bond older and more powerful than our pack bloodlines. Elara looked at Liam, her violet eyes swimming with tears. But this time they were not of sorrow. An anchor, she whispered. That's what you were trying to teach me to be for myself. But the prophecy, it says, you are my anchor. Suddenly Liam felt it, a low thrum of energy in the room. He realized it was coming from Elara. Her emotions were running high, and her chaotic power was beginning to stir. The candles on the table flickered, and a chill entered the air. But this time something was different. Liam felt the energy not as an outside observer, but as if it were a current flowing towards him. Instinctively, without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. The moment their skin touched the flickering stopped. The air warmed. The chaotic energy flowed into him, not harming him, but grounding itself, finding a safe harbor. It felt like a circuit being completed. For the first time, Elara's power felt controlled, stable. They all saw it. They all felt the shift. The untamable storm that was Elara Vance had just found its eye. And it was a mortal man from Dublin with a half-finished PhD and a back full of stitches. The twist wasn't just that he had survived. It was that his survival, his act of selfless love, had fundamentally changed the nature of their world. He hadn't just saved a girl from exile. He had unlocked the key to her power and fulfilled a prophecy they had long dismissed as myth. He was no longer just Liam O'Connell, the human scholar. He was the Protector. The revelation in the library left the three brothers in a state of stunned silence. They had been raised on tales of pack law bloodlines and the strength of the wolf. Their entire worldview was built on the foundation of their own inherent supernatural superiority. That foundation had just been pulverized by a prophecy that centered not on a mighty alpha, but on the sacrifice of a human. Kyle, Ronan, and Finn exchanged long, heavy looks. Everything they had done, the isolation of their sister, the brutal enforcement of the law, their treatment of Liam, had been through the lens of their duty. They had acted to protect the pack from a power they feared. Now this ancient text told them their fear had been ignorance. They hadn't been protecting the pack. They had been persecuting the very person, and now the two people who were destined to be its salvation. The weight of that guilt was staggering. Morwen, seeing the gravity of the moment, quietly ushered a still-dazed Liam and Elara out of the library and back to the healer's lodge, leaving the brothers alone with the truth. Liam sat on the edge of the bed while Elara changed the dressing on his back. The wounds, impossibly, were no longer open gashes, but clean red lines, already scarring over with unnatural speed. The bond between them was a palpable thing now, a quiet hum beneath his skin. He could feel her emotions, her relief, her joy, her underlying anxiety, as if they were his own. "I can't believe it," Elara said, her hands gentle on his skin. "All my life I thought I was broken. A curse." My own brothers looked at me with fear. They were acting on the knowledge they had, Liam said, surprised to find himself defending them. They were trying to protect their people. They just didn't know they were going about it all wrong. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Liam expected it to be Morwen, but when the door opened, Cale Vance stood in the entryway alone. He was stripped of his alpha's authority, looking for all the world like a man carrying an immense burden. His brothers Ronan and Finn stood a few feet behind him in the doorway, their expressions equally somber. Kyle's eyes met Liam's. There was no hostility left in them, only a deep, profound remorse. He walked into the room, his heavy boots silent on the wooden floor. He stopped a few feet before Liam, who was still seated on the bed. "We came to speak with you," Kyle began, his voice rough. "What you did at the post, it was the bravest thing I have ever witnessed, and what we did to you was a failure of our duty, a failure of our family." He turned his gaze to Elara. "And to you, sister. I have no words to express my regret. I let my fear and the letter of the law blind me to the truth of my own blood. I failed you." Elara's eyes filled with tears, but she simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a wound that would take a long time to heal. Ronan stepped forward, his usual cynical edge completely gone. "We saw you as a threat, O'Connell, an outsider prying where he didn't belong. We were wrong. You saw her?" He gestured to Elara with clarity. "You saw the person, not the power. We who shared her blood could not." Finn was last, his face etched with shame. "I held her back while he pointed at Kyle, nearly beat you to death. I will never forget that. I stood by and did nothing." Liam looked at the three powerful men, the leaders of this fierce, proud pack, and saw not alphas or betas, but brothers who were lost. He slowly, painfully got to his feet so he could face them eye to eye. "Everything you did for your pack," Liam said. "I can't fault you for that." Kyle shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. "But you are the pack's future now. The prophecy is clear. You are her guardian, and through her, you are the guardian of our future, the protector." And then Cale Vance did something that shattered 1,000 years of pack tradition. He, the alpha of the Blackwood pack, the descendant of a line of kings, dropped to one knee before the human. He lowered his head in a gesture of ultimate submission and respect. Ronan and Finn, seeing their alphas lead, immediately did the same. They knelt, bowing their heads, before the man they had scorned, beaten and almost killed less than 24 hours before. The three most powerful werewolves in the territory were kneeling on the floor of the healer's lodge. They were bowing to him. Liam was stunned into silence. This was so much more than an apology. A bow from an alpha to anyone, let alone a human, was an unprecedented seismic shift in their culture. It was an acknowledgement of a new authority, a new power dynamic. "What are you doing?" Liam finally managed to say. "Get up." "No," Kyle said, his voice resolute, his head still bowed. "The old law was answered by your blood. A new order has been established by the prophecy. We no longer see a human. We see the protector as foretold. Our loyalty is to the pack, and you are now its shield. We offer you our allegiance, our strength, our lives. Command us." Liam looked at Elara, whose face was a mirror of his own shock. This was the twist he never could have anticipated. He had endured the lashes to save her from exile, to protect her from her family. And in doing so, he had been given command of her family. The very wolves who had ordered his torment were now his sworn swords. He knew he couldn't be their commander. It wasn't who he was. But he also knew that this gesture was necessary for them, a way to rebalance the scales of their honor. "Get up," Liam said again, his voice firmer this time. "All of you." Slowly they rose to their feet. "I am not your commander," Liam said, looking each of them in the eye. "I am Liam, and I love your sister. That is why I did what I did. The prophecy calls me a protector, an anchor. That is what I will be for her. But you," he looked at Kale, "are the alpha. You lead the pack. That has not changed. What has changed is that from now on you lead with us. Elara's gift will not be feared. It will be understood. We will all learn together, as a family." It was the perfect thing to say. It gave them back their dignity while cementing the new reality. He wasn't seizing power. He was joining their circle, transforming it from within. For the first time since he'd met him, Liam saw Cale Vance smile. It was a small, tired, but genuine smile. "Then we have much to learn," the Alpha said, "and we are honored to have you as our teacher." The air in the room was different. The tension was gone, replaced by a fragile but powerful sense of unity. The brothers had bowed before him, not just out of respect for his endurance, but in deference to a destiny they finally understood. The human had become the heart of their pack. The days that followed the revelation were a period of profound and rapid change for the Blackwood pack. The story of Liam's sacrifice and the fulfillment of the prophecy spread through the community, like a cleansing fire, burning away the old fears and prejudices against Elara. She was no longer the pariah. She was the moon-gifted, and Liam was her protector. The two were now inseparable, their names spoken in the same breath with a new reverence. Liam's healing continued at an astonishing rate. The bond he shared with Elara seemed to channel a fraction of her regenerative werewolf abilities into him. Within a week, the scars on his back were faint silver lines, a permanent reminder of the price he had paid. But the changes weren't just physical. He felt more alive, more attuned to the world around him. He could sense the emotional state of the pack members, feel the life thrumming in the forest, and above all, he felt Elara's presence as a constant, comforting warmth in his soul. The brothers kept their word. They became Liam's staunchest allies. Their dynamic shifted from one of hostile tolerance to one of deep familial respect. Kyle, embracing his role as alpha in this new era, began consulting Liam on matters of pack law and tradition, valuing his scholarly perspective. He initiated lessons for the younger wolves, teaching them the true story of the Luna Inordinata and the importance of understanding, not fearing, what is different. Ronan the strategist took it upon himself to train Liam. "If you are to be a protector, you need to know how to fight." He stated his tone, practical, not challenging. He began teaching Liam hand-to-hand combat strategy and how to use his newfound senses to his advantage. Liam was still human, weaker and slower than any of them, but Ronan taught him to be smarter, to use leverage, and to anticipate his opponent's moves. During these sessions, Liam earned not just Ronan's respect, but his friendship. Finn, the enforcer with the wounded conscience, became Liam and Elara's constant companion. He sought to atone for his past inaction by offering unwavering support, acting as a bridge between the couple and the rest of the pack, ensuring they were integrated back into the family they had been torn from. Most importantly, Liam worked with Elara. Together they explored her powers. With him as her anchor, she could delve into her abilities without fear. She learned to consciously tap into the flow of wild magic. She discovered she could soothe agitated animals, encourage plants to grow, and even gain fleeting glimpses of the future. Her visions were no longer terrifying, uncontrolled assaults. They were whispers she could learn to interpret. Her cabin was no longer a prison, but became a sanctuary where she and Liam spent hours practicing her laughter, echoing through the trees, more often than Liam had ever thought possible. Their love, forged in secrecy and trial, now blossomed in the open. It was a legendary romance, the story of which was already becoming a new myth for the pack, the human who bled for the wolf, and the wolf who gave him her heart. About a month after the lashing, the new dynamic was put to its first true test. The rogue attacks that had been plaguing the edges of their territory, the ones that had led to Silas's accidental vision, suddenly intensified. A trio of large, savage rogues, drawn by the scent of Ilara's now stabilized and potent power, launched a coordinated assault on the pack's perimeter, hoping to claim the territory and its source of magic for themselves. The alarm was raised. Kyle let out a fierce howl that called his warriors to battle. Liam, who was with Ilara near the creek, felt a jolt of her fear through their bond. "Stay here," Liam said, his voice calm and firm. "No," Ilara replied, her violet eyes flashing with a new confidence. "We do this together." They arrived at the edge of the compound to see Cale Ronan and Finn in their massive wolf forms, locked in a brutal struggle with the three intruders. The rogues were larger, more feral, driven by a desperate madness. One of them broke past Finn, charging directly towards the center of the compound, towards the dens where the children were sheltered. Without a thought, Liam moved. He was no match for the creature's strength, but Ronan's training kicked in. He grabbed a heavy fallen branch, not to strike, but to brace. As the rogue lunged, Liam jammed the branch into the soft earth at an angle, creating a crude, impromptu spear. The rogue, too, focused on its target, impaled itself on the sharpened point, howling in pain and fury. It was wounded, but not stopped. It thrashed, knocking Liam to the ground, its massive jaws snapping inches from his face. Just as the rogue was about to deliver a killing bite, a wave of energy washed over it. The plants on the ground around the beast suddenly grew with explosive speed, thick vines and thorny creepers wrapping around its legs, anchoring it to the ground. The rogue roared in confusion, entangled and immobilized. Liam looked up. Ilara stood 50 feet away, her hands outstretched, her eyes glowing with a soft, silvery light. She was in complete control, her power a precise and effective tool. Seeing their comrade trapped, the other two rogues faltered. It was the opening Cale and Ronan needed. With a synchronized and devastating attack, they brought the remaining intruders down. The fight was over. The pack was safe. Liam got to his feet, breathing heavily. Kyle, shifting back to his human form, strode over to him, clapping a heavy hand on his shoulder. He looked from Liam's bruised but determined face to his sister, who was now calmly receding the vines back into the earth. "The spear that guards the moon." Kyle said, a look of profound pride on his face. "The prophecy is fulfilled. Together, you are more powerful than any alpha." Liam walked over to Ilara, taking her hand. He felt the residual energy of her magic thrumming through her, but it was calm, controlled. She smiled at him, a radiant, beautiful smile free from all fear. They were no longer the broken pariah and the foolish human. They were a team, a single unit forged from sacrifice magic, and a love that had rewritten the very laws of nature. Their journey was far from over, but this was a new beginning, a dawn for the Guardian and his moon-gifted mate, united and whole at the heart of their family. And so, the story of Liam and Elara became a new legend for the Blackwood Pack, a testament that true strength isn't measured in the sharpness of one's claws or the power of a bloodline, but in the courage of the heart. Theirs is a journey of impossible love, a sacrifice that shattered old laws and forged a destiny stronger than anyone could have imagined. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest power comes not from what we are, but from what we are willing to do for those we love. If this story of a human sacrifice and a love that redefined a world stirred your heart, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with fellow romance lovers, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more epic tales. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. What part of Liam and Elara's journey moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you.